Two names, Diana Ross, Michael Jackson, the Queen and the Prodigy. Two voices that defined decades of American sound, and two souls forever linked by a bond the world could never quite understand. Long before rumours, long before the headlines, there was a connection built on admiration and need. She was the star he wanted to be. He was the child she once was lost in the machine of fame, too young to escape. Hollywood sold their friendship as a dream, the Queen of Motown mentoring the new Prince of Pop. But underneath the spotlights and smiles lay a truth no press release ever printed, that Diana and Michael were two people who saw in each other what they had lost in themselves. When they met in 1969, Motown was a kingdom of rhythm, and Diana Ross was its ruler. Michael, just 11, was a spark of raw energy, a boy singing like he'd already lived 100 lives. She saw him and did what only a true artist could do. She recognized a mirror. For Michael, Diana wasn't just a mentor. She was the blueprint. The way she moved, the way she spoke, the way the world bent toward her presence, he studied it all. Her grace was his compass, her approval his oxygen. But the closer he got to her light, the darker his own shadow became. Because every idol has its price, and every protégé sooner or later has to outgrow the hands that shaped him. Their story is not a love story. It's a confession, a testament to fame, to power, to the silent exchange between two souls trapped in the same golden cage. Before she became a goddess in sequins, Diana Ernestine Earl Ross was just a girl from Detroit. A girl with a dream bigger than the city that raised her. The projects where she grew up didn't promise hope, only noise, poverty, and struggle. But Diana had something stronger than hope. She had belief. She wasn't born into privilege. She wasn't discovered by luck. She built herself note by note, mirror by mirror. In her bedroom, she would sing to cracked glass, watching her reflection become a stage. She didn't just imitate stars, she studied them. The way they smiled, the way they moved their hands when the lights found them, every gesture, every look, rehearsed for a life she hadn't lived yet. Then came the Primettes, the small neighborhood group that would one day become the Supremes. 3 girls in matching dresses, singing love songs to crowds who never thought they'd see the inside of a studio. They auditioned for Motown Records, and Barry Gordy Jr., the sharp-eyed emperor of that new musical kingdom, saw something in Diana no one else did. A calm ambition, a quiet power. She wasn't the loudest voice. She wasn't even the best singer in the group. But she had what no one else had: magnetism. When she looked into the camera, she didn't just sing to it. She commanded it. Gordy saw it and slowly began shaping her destiny. He gave her solos, visibility, opportunity, and soon the Supremes became Diana Ross and the Supremes. That small change, that one name before the others, split the group but sealed her fate. Fame and betrayal were now the same song. Diana rose fast. By 1964, she was the most visible black woman on American television. Elegant, poised, controlled, she became an icon of sophistication in an era that didn't want women like her on its screens. To some, she was a symbol of progress. To others, a threat. She faced envy, resentment, even from those who once called her sister. But Diana didn't fight back. She smiled, always smiled, because she knew what few understood, that power is never given, it's performed. Her rise was meteoric but lonely. The more she achieved, the more she became untouchable. By the late 1960s, she wasn't just a singer, she was a phenomenon. Motown built her into its crown jewel, polished, flawless, untouchable. But perfection is a dangerous currency. The world expects you to never bleed, never falter, never age. And Diana learned to give them exactly that. When she left the Supremes in 1970, she didn't just step away from a group, she stepped away from the version of herself that had belonged to other people. She was reborn as Diana Ross, solo artist, film star, cultural icon. Her debut album wasn't just music, it was a declaration. Songs like Ain't No Mountain High Enough became hymns of transcendence, the sound of a woman who refused to be contained by the city that birthed her or the men who managed her. Hollywood took notice. She became the lead in Lady Sings the Blues, portraying Billie Holiday, another woman who sang truth into a world that punished honesty. Diana's performance wasn't acting, it was prophecy. Every tear on screen belonged to both of them, to every woman who ever turned pain into melody. She earned an Oscar nomination, a Golden Globe, and a crown she never asked for. But beneath the glamour, there was something darker, an emptiness the applause couldn't fill. Fame had made her divine, but divinity is a lonely calling. Those who loved her began to vanish, replaced by people who loved the reflection of her, not the reality. And somewhere, watching her rise from afar, was a boy named Michael Jackson, still in his teens, learning what it meant to be seen and unseen at the same time. He saw in her everything he wanted: elegance, command, control. She'd escaped the cage of poverty, of limitation. And he believed that if he followed her, he could escape his own. Diana's rise wasn't just the story of a singer. It was the blueprint for modern fame, a map drawn in sacrifice. Every step upward was paid for in whispers, exhaustion and isolation. But she kept walking. Because when you were born into silence, applause sounds like love. And in that love she built a throne, one so high that even her reflection began to look like a stranger. Michael Jackson was not born into fame. He was born into survival. Gary, Indiana, a small industrial town where every street smelled of metal and rain. A place where childhood ended early and dreams had to fight through factory smoke. But even there, behind the cracked walls of a family struggling to eat, there was a voice. A voice too pure, too precise, too impossible for its age. Joseph Jackson. His father didn't hear a child, he heard a product. The rehearsals were punishments. The stage was salvation. And every note Michael sang was another brick in the empire his father was building, one hit song at a time. By 10 years old, he was already famous. By 11, he was already tired. By 12, he had already learned that applause can sound like love and love can hurt like a belt. Then came Motown, the kingdom of rhythm ruled by Berry Gordy. It was there that Michael first met her. Diana Ross, the woman who glowed like starlight, who could silence a room with a glance, who carried herself like she'd already seen heaven. When she looked at Michael, she didn't see a boy. She saw a mirror of her own hunger, that same unstoppable will to rise. He was fascinated by her, obsessed even. The way she moved, the way she never seemed afraid, the way people bent to her presence without her ever raising her voice. For a child raised in fear, Diana's control looked like freedom. When the Jackson 5 first appeared on television in 1969, Diana introduced them personally. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome my discovery, the Jackson 5. Her voice trembled slightly, not from nerves but from pride. It was the moment she passed on the torch and he caught it with both hands. From that day forward, Michael's world revolved around her. He called her Miss Ross. He sent her letters, long confessions written in the neat, careful script of a boy who wanted to be loved by his hero. He asked her what to wear, how to move, how to smile. He collected her photos, her interviews, her perfume. Diana wasn't just a mentor, she became an obsession that blurred into identity. When friends asked who he admired most, he didn't say James Brown or Sammy Davis Jr. He said Diana. Because to Michael, she wasn't just talent, she was transformation. She had become proof that you could rewrite who you were, that you could step out of pain and into glory, that you could make the world forget where you came from. And that became Michael's mission. He didn't want to sing like her. He wanted to exist like her. Graceful, untouchable. A myth dressed as a person. As the 1970s unfolded, he began to imitate her, the soft gestures, the controlled voice, the calm defiance in every interview. He learned that charisma was a weapon and that smiles could disarm a question. He began to wear his hair like hers, speak like her, even move his hands the same way when he talked. People noticed, but no one understood. Because for Michael, Diana wasn't just a person, she was the escape plan. She became the symbol of everything he wanted to be. Beautiful, beloved, and in control of his own story. Something he had never truly been. In interviews, he would say, "Diana Ross taught me how to be me." But the truth was deeper. He didn't learn how to be himself. He learned how to become her. Every success he achieved, every chart, every award carried a trace of her reflection. He once said privately, "When I look at her, I see what I could be if I was strong enough." That was the tragedy of it all. Michael didn't want to replace Diana Ross. He wanted to become the part of her that never broke. The part that smiled when the world demanded pain. She was the fire he stood too close to, the light that made his own shine feel smaller. And in the quiet moments between tours and chaos, he would still call her, still seek her approval, still need to know that his goddess was proud of her creation. Because deep down, he wasn't chasing fame. He was chasing her, the woman who had shown him that fame could feel like love, and love, sometimes, could sound like applause. By 1977, Diana Ross was already untouchable, a monument to control, to power, to survival. Michael Jackson, meanwhile, was standing on the fragile edge between adolescence and reinvention. He was still the boy everyone adored, but inside something was shifting. The fame that once felt like magic now felt like machinery. And he was tired of being a product of Motown. He wanted to become an artist. That transformation began with a single invitation. A phone call. A voice he knew by heart. Diana Ross. "Michael, they're remaking The Wizard of Oz, but this time for us." The project was called The Whiz, a reimagined all-black version of the 1939 classic. A musical, bright and soulful on the surface, but behind it, something deeper was being written. A message about identity, freedom, and the courage to find your way home. Diana would play Dorothy. Michael would play the Scarecrow. To the press, it was a reunion, the mentor and her protégé together again. But on set, something unspoken began to rise between them. For Michael, it was destiny, a chance to finally stand beside his goddess, not as a student, but as her equal. He prepared obsessively. He studied the movements of real crows, practiced for hours in front of mirrors, his body bending like clay, his laughter echoing through empty rehearsal rooms. He told his friends, "I'm going to make people see my soul." And he did. When The Whiz premiered, critics might have dismissed it, but those who watched closely saw something different. A young man shedding his childhood, becoming something the world had never seen before. On screen, Michael's Scarecrow is more than a character. He's a metaphor, a being longing for wisdom, searching for something that was always inside him. And Diana's Dorothy becomes his guide, luminous, compassionate, unreachable. The chemistry between them wasn't scripted. It was memory. It was longing. Between takes, the crew noticed how Michael hovered around her, always just within reach but never intruding. He carried her bags. He fetched her tea. He laughed at jokes that weren't funny, just to hear her voice. And when the camera stopped, he looked at her like a student watching a masterpiece come alive. For Diana, it was both beautiful and heavy. She saw in him not a boy anymore, but a man who had moulded himself out of the reflection she once cast. It frightened her a little. Because in Michael's eyes, she wasn't just Diana Ross. She was salvation. She was the dream. And dreams, she knew, have a way of consuming the dreamer. At night, Michael would write about her in his journals, long pages of devotion and gratitude, mixed with sadness. He wrote, "She's the only person who truly knows who I am. When I'm around her, I don't have to be Michael Jackson. I can just be me." But that me was already fading. As the Whiz rapped, something deeper awakened inside him, a hunger to break free. Working alongside Diana, he had witnessed the full architecture of power. She moved through rooms as if gravity itself obeyed her. He wanted that same command, not borrowed, not learned, but his own. In the months that followed, Michael spent hours with Quincy Jones, who'd also worked on the Whiz. It was Quincy who introduced him to a new language of sound, and together they began designing a future beyond Motown. A future where Michael would no longer be Diana's boy. He would be Michael Jackson. But freedom came with a price, the first fracture in the bond that had defined them both. Diana had given him his wings. And now she would have to watch him fly beyond her reach. Still, in interviews, Michael never forgot. He called her his mother, his mentor, his guiding star. But the truth was quieter and far more complicated. He loved her, yes, but he also needed to surpass her, to outshine the light that once gave him life. And so, The Whiz became more than a film. It was a prophecy. Dorothy helped the Scarecrow find his mind. And once he did, he didn't follow her back home. He followed the music. He followed the rhythm of his own becoming. By the time the credits rolled, one thing was clear. Michael Jackson was no longer the boy who wanted to be Diana Ross. He was the man who would inherit her throne. But the closer he came to her crown, the more he began to understand the loneliness that came with it. Because in Hollywood, when you reach the top, you don't find freedom. You find silence. Fame never stays loyal. It loves you only when the world still needs you. And for Diana Ross and Michael Jackson, two stars born from the same storm, the wind was changing. The mentor and her protégé had conquered everything. Grammys, films, fashion, headlines, and hearts. But success doesn't unite people, it separates them. Because when two suns rise in the same sky, one must eventually eclipse the other. The distance begins. After The Whiz, Michael's career erupted. His partnership with Quincy Jones gave birth to Off the Wall, and then to Thriller, the most successful album in history. In a single decade, he became something beyond human, a global myth, a voice that could summon continents, a man the world mistook for magic. But with every record sold, every crowd that screamed his name, the phone calls to Diana grew fewer, the visits stopped, the laughter faded. Diana watched it all from afar, smiling on red carpets, clapping in interviews, pretending the world she'd helped create didn't hurt her as it slipped away. Behind her smile was a quiet ache, a question she never spoke aloud. Did I raise my replacement? She'd once held his hand through fear. Now he moved through galaxies she could no longer reach, mirror and shadow. For Michael, the distance was not rejection, it was necessity. He had spent his entire youth in her reflection. Now he needed to create his own. He still called her Miss Ross. But the voice that once trembled with admiration now carried the weight of equality. He had become her reflection, and reflections have no masters. Yet even as he transcended everything, the echoes of Diana still haunted him. He dressed like her, moved like her, even curated his public image with the same precision she had taught him. But where Diana had used control to protect herself, Michael used it to erase himself. Each surgery, each mask, each transformation was another chapter in his silent war against identity. In interviews, he still mentioned her name, always with reverence. But between the lines, there was pain. He once said softly, "Diana means a lot to me. She always will. But we live in different worlds now." And she did not disagree, because she knew. She had been there once, the lonely place at the top where applause turns to static. She had lived that same isolation, and now she saw him living it too. But fame doesn't let you save anyone. It only lets you watch them drown gracefully. The quiet jealousy. The media loved the story of their friendship. But behind every headline was quiet competition. For years, Diana had been the standard of excellence. Now, every award, every headline, every whispered compliment to Michael was a reminder that the torch she had once passed had set the whole sky on fire without her. There were rumours that she felt replaced, that he had outgrown his idol, that she couldn't accept a world where her protégé was now a god. But the truth was gentler and crueler. She wasn't jealous of his fame. She was jealous of his freedom. Michael, for all his pain, had created a world that belonged to him alone. Neverland, a kingdom where he could rewrite the childhood stolen from him. Diana, meanwhile, was still trapped in the real world, a place where age steals everything the cameras once gave you. The unspoken goodbye. They didn't fight. They simply drifted. One day there were no more phone calls, no more shared stages, no more late-night letters written in the language of mutual pain. But they never truly said goodbye. Instead, their silence became its own form of communication, a language of glances, of distance, of nostalgia unspoken. Because how do you mourn something that was never broken, only dissolved? At award shows, when their paths crossed, they smiled like strangers who shared a secret. When Diana mentioned him, her eyes softened. When Michael mentioned her, his voice trembled. They were bound forever, but not by love, by the knowledge that each had built the other. He carried her lessons into his world of fantasy. She carried his ghost into every note she sang after him. Two legends, one silence. By the late 1980s, the world saw two untouchable icons. But behind the glass there were only two people who missed each other and didn't know how to say it. She had once said, "Michael has a light that frightens me sometimes. It's too bright for this world." And she was right. Because when you burn that bright, the light stops illuminating and starts consuming. He became a symbol, not a person. She became a legacy, not a woman. And in their quiet separation, they both learned the same cruel truth. The higher you climb, the harder it is to hear anyone's voice, even the one that taught you how to sing. When the news broke, the world stopped breathing. June 25th, 2009. Michael Jackson was gone. And for a moment, even Hollywood's endless noise fell silent. The streets of Los Angeles filled with candles instead of cameras. People wept in languages that had no word for why. For Diana Ross, it was not just the death of a friend. It was the collapse of an entire chapter of her own life. The boy she'd discovered, the boy who had once hidden behind her skirts on stage, was suddenly a memory, and the mirror she'd spent decades avoiding was staring back at her. The silence before the storm. In the days that followed, Diana Ross vanished. No interviews, no statements, just silence. For her, grief was private, not a performance, not a headline. Because Michael's death wasn't a spectacle, it was an echo. A haunting reminder of how fragile the dream had always been. Behind the locked doors of her Beverly Hills home, she watched old footage of the two of them, the Whiz, award shows, rehearsals. In every clip there was laughter, and in that laughter, something she hadn't noticed before, a sadness that had been there all along. She told a friend later, "He always wanted to be perfect, and I should have told him he already was." The funeral that wasn't. When Michael's public memorial was announced, the world waited for Diana. She didn't come. People whispered. They accused her of coldness, of pride, of abandonment. But they didn't know the truth. Diana Ross didn't stay away because she didn't care. She stayed away because she couldn't bear to see it. Because every note of Gone Too Soon would have sounded like a confession. She wrote a letter instead. It was short, almost too short, but every word was heavy. I am trying to find closure, but my heart will not let me. Michael was my child. I loved him deeply, and I still do. It was the closest she ever came to admitting that her silence was her way of breaking. The will. A few weeks later, another revelation surfaced. Michael's will was made public. Among the names listed for the care of his children, one stood out. Diana Ross. The world gasped. Not family, not siblings, Diana. It was a decision that said more than any interview ever could. Even after years of distance, she was still the person he trusted with the most sacred part of himself, his children, his legacy, his innocence. When asked about it later, she said softly, "He knew I would protect them. I promised him that once, and I meant it. No one ever found out when that promise was made. But those close to Michael said it was years before his death, in a moment when he was tired and afraid, when he whispered to her that the world was trying to break him. And Diana had answered like a mother, 'Then you come to me.' But he never did." The confession. Years later, in a rare interview, Diana Ross spoke his name again. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were the colour of regret. "People think I made him, but the truth is he made me believe in magic again. He was a mirror, and sometimes I didn't like what I saw." The reporter asked if she ever felt guilty. She paused for a long time, then whispered, "I wish I had told him to slow down." It wasn't a confession of crime, it was a confession of helplessness. Because Diana had seen the machine up close. She knew how it fed on innocence and spit out icons. And for all her wisdom, for all her power, she couldn't save the boy she loved like a son from the fate she'd once escaped herself. The shrine. Inside her home, she kept a room no one entered. A room with curtains always drawn, walls lined with photos from Motown days, the Whiz, and that first TV appearance. In the corner sat a small silver frame with a note in Michael's handwriting. "Dear Emma, to my Miss Ross, thank you for teaching me how to fly." Visitor said she sometimes stood in that room for hours, motionless, listening to old records of his voice, as if waiting for him to walk back through the door. One night alone, she was heard whispering, "You found your freedom, baby. I hope it's not lonely where you are." The weight of legacy. The world moved on. Documentaries, trials, rumours, the same machine that had fed on Michael kept feeding. But Diana never joined the noise. She refused to add to the chorus of explanations. Her silence became its own form of truth. Because what she felt for Michael wasn't just friendship or mentorship. It was recognition. She saw in him the boy she'd once been hungry, beautiful, terrified. And in his downfall, she saw the cost of everything she had ever taught him. Her confession wasn't in words. It was in the silence between them, a silence that had begun long before his death and never ended after. The letter that no one read. According to a family friend, Diana wrote one last letter after his death. It was never published, never read at any memorial, but it was found among her private papers years later. It said, "I was your teacher, but you were the lesson. I thought I was guiding you to the stars, but you showed me how lonely the sky can be. Forgive me for teaching you how to fly without teaching you how to land." And that was her confession, not spoken into a microphone, not written for the press, but left for time itself to discover. Because in Hollywood, truth always arrives late. And sometimes it sounds like a song you can't listen to anymore. By the time Diana Ross heard Michael's voice for the last time, it didn't sound like a king speaking. It sounded like a child trying to find his way home. The call came late. Past midnight in Los Angeles, morning in the rest of the world. She was half asleep when the phone rang, that old number, the one she never changed in case he ever needed her again. "Miss Ross," his voice said softly. "It's me." Even after all those years, he still called her Miss Ross. The same tone, the same innocence, the same trembling need to be understood. The call. He talked for nearly an hour, not about fame or tours or charts, but about time, about how fast it had gone, how many faces he had worn, how many people he had loved through masks. "Sometimes I wish I could start over," he told her. "Just go back to the Whiz. Just you and me and the music." Diana listened in silence. She knew that kind of ache, the nostalgia that tastes like guilt. She told him to rest, to take a break, to stop letting the world devour him. But he laughed that fragile laugh she hadn't heard since he was a boy. "I can't stop, Miss Ross. If I stop, they'll forget me." She closed her eyes, remembering her own youth, the same fear that had once lived inside her like fire. "They'll never forget you, baby," she whispered. "You're carved into the sky." He didn't answer for a long time. Then, quietly, "I just wanted to hear your voice." And the line went still. She didn't know it then, but that was goodbye. The night after, on the night he died, Diana said she woke up suddenly, as if someone had called her name from across a vast room. She checked her phone, no message, but she felt it. That heaviness, that strange calm that only follows when something sacred has left the world. The next morning she turned on the television and saw his face. The headline. The disbelief. And she knew the sound she'd heard in her dream wasn't silence. It was departure. She sat alone for hours. No tears. Just stillness. Because how do you cry for someone who was already half gone when he was alive? Echoes. In the weeks that followed, she saw him everywhere. In magazine covers, not in fans crying in the streets, in the voices of people who suddenly claimed to have known him best. But none of them had been there at the beginning, when the boy with the big brown eyes called her Miss Ross and believed she could fix everything. Sometimes she would catch her reflection in the mirror and see traces of him, his gestures, his posture, the way he had once imitated her until he became his own reflection. Now she was the one haunted by his shadow. The letter he never sent. A few months later, a small envelope arrived at her home, postmarked months before his death. Inside was a note in Michael's handwriting, neat, looping, full of innocence. "Dear Miss Ross, if I ever go too far away, don't be sad. I'll still be that little boy you believed in. Tell the world I was happy when I sang. Tell them I was free when I danced. Love always, Michael." She folded the letter, pressed it to her heart, and whispered, "You were always free, baby. You just didn't know it." The stage that never happened. Years before his death, they had talked about one last performance together, a tribute to Motown, a return to where it all began. He wanted her to sing Ain't No Mountain High Enough, and he would join her for the last verse. But it never happened. Schedules, egos, fears, the usual Hollywood ghosts. And after he was gone, Diana refused every offer to sing it live again. "That song belongs to him now," she said. When she performs today, there's a moment just before the encore, when the lights dim, and a soft instrumental of Ease On Down the Road plays. She doesn't sing. She just stands there, eyes closed, as if listening for footsteps that never come. The final goodbye. In her later years, Diana was asked once more about Michael, the boy, the man, the myth. She smiled faintly and said, "He was my angel, and angels never really die. They just stop needing wings." When the interviewer pressed, asking what she would tell him now if she could, she looked past the camera, as if seeing something just beyond the light. "I'd tell him, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for not pulling you back sooner. I thought I was showing you how to fly. I didn't realize you'd fly too close to the sun." The legacy. Today their names live in separate worlds. Diana, the eternal diva, and Michael, the eternal child. But their stories are bound together, written in the same rhythm, echoing through every artist who dares to chase perfection. Because beneath all the gold, beneath all the applause and mythology, there are two souls who once believed that fame could fill the emptiness inside. It never did, but it gave them each other. And in that shared fire, in that strange, impossible love between teacher and student, between mother and son, between star and reflection, they found something the world could never understand. Not romance, not rivalry, something far more sacred, recognition. She was his beginning, he was her reflection. And the silence between them became their final song. Closing narration, outro voiceover. Soft orchestral fade, camera slowly pulls away from an empty stage bathed in golden light. In the end, fame didn't destroy them. It only revealed what they were searching for. Not glory, not power. Just someone to see them, truly see them. Diana Ross and Michael Jackson were not gods. They were mirrors, reflecting back everything we worship in the dream called Hollywood, and everything it takes away,